What we do know is the president will outline a little bit of his spending priorities. Now, keep in mind, president will propose, and it's up to Congress to dispose. And in this president's case, because he got his economic team together fairly late, in fact, they're still not all together, and he just got his budget director in within the last couple of days, the feeling seems to be that he's got a sort of a half-attempted budget. But it is a budget that calls for $54 billion more in defense spending. He says that those savings will be extracted from other areas. He's predicting a boom in economic activity that will more than compensate for that, but he is leaving off that any changes in entitlements like Social Security and Medicare. That as far as he is concerned, there's no need to touch those right now. David Stockman, Ronald Reagan's former budget director, says that would be a mistake. He's a little bit worried about that. He joins us now out of New York. David, no entitlements. That's 2/3 of the budget that, for the time being, is off the table with this president and presumably Congress. What do you think of that?
Well, I think Trump is so far, so deep in fiscal la-la land that if he won't even find the envelope with the wrong answer. He is saying crazy things. Saturday, he tweeted he'd reduced the national debt by $12 billion. He's actually increased the net debt in 35 days by $187 billion. He inherited that. $5 billion a day of red ink going out the door.
Well, he's referring to the $12 billion in the first roughly month in office versus the $200 billion increase we saw in Barack Obama's first 30 days in office. But regardless, the math is specious at best on this, right? And there are a variety of reasons for that, right? Explain.
No, the reason is that when he took office, there was $382 billion of cash in the Treasury. It's down to $178 billion Friday afternoon. They've burned through $204 billion of cash while, he was trying to get the administration organized in an economic team.
But is that his doing, whether he got more money in or less money in? I mean, is that the new president's doing, just as was it Barack Obama's doing in his first month?
It wasn't in either case. The point is, to make that kind of tweet or point indicates a total unfamiliarity with the facts. And those facts are going to take down this whole program. He's got a debt ceiling that goes back into place March 15, 2 weeks from now. It'll be frozen in. He'll have maybe 50 days of cash left. By the time we get to June or July, there is going to be a debt ceiling crisis like never before. He will not get the Republicans to vote for a huge increase in the debt ceiling if they've not yet repealed and replaced Obamacare, which isn't happening, or even started on chipping.
Why do you say it's not happening?
Because they are so divided, and if you look at the Ryan draft that came out over the weekend, it's basically Obamacare light. It's not really repealing anything. It's basically reneging and, turning the Medicaid expansion into a block grant, turning the exchanges into tax credits. It's still going to cost trillions of dollars.
All right. So your point is that, and I know you're against, one big program and making it less than big as it was program. But having said that, you're right to say there's not a lot of wiggle room. Only 2 votes in the Senate, maybe 22 in the House, and then all of a sudden you're back to to zero. And presumably the tax cuts then get delayed if we see the tax cuts this year at all. What do you think of that?
I don't think we're going to see the tax cuts this year at all. As I say, not a chance. There is going to be a debt ceiling crisis like never before this summer. And that's what people don't realize. They've burned up all the cash that Obama left on the balance sheet for whatever reason.
But they run the show, David. I mean, they, unlike making this a drama with President Obama, they run the House, the Senate, so they can go ahead and approve something, even though they might not flip over it, to go ahead and get those tax cuts, because I'm sure they realize without them, their party's screwed in the midterms, right?
Well, they might try that, but everybody's agreed you got to get Obamacare done first. That's going to take all year.
Why is that? Why did they do it that way?
Because they passed a budget resolution for fiscal 17, the one we're in now, that gives reconciliation so they can get it through the Senate with 50 votes. You have to have another reconciliation.
But why couldn't they do the tax cuts first?
Well, they decided to do it the other way because they had the naive notion that they could repeal and replace day one. But now they're stuck with their decision. They need now a budget resolution for fiscal 2018
right.
with an instruction for tax reform. But they, they're not going to get that passed before the end of summer.
But you know, David, have you changed your mind on the president a little bit? There was a time there where you were giving him the benefit of the doubt. Now you seem to be giving him the doubt of the benefit. There was a time when you were looking at his tax cuts, you were looking at the prospect for growth, but what happened here?
Well, I've thrown in the towel because I think he's not paying attention, he's not learning anything, and he's making ridiculous statements.
He's just a month in.
Well, we don't need a $54 billion increase in defense when the budget already is 10 times bigger than that of Russia. We don't need, $6 trillion of defense spending over the next decade because China's going nowhere except trying to keep their Ponzi scheme together. So the idea...
I think your old boss, Ronald Reagan, would disagree, though, right? I mean, he was all for building up the defense, right?
Yeah, and that was a huge mistake because we ended up destroying the ability to cut domestic spending if you're increasing defense at that kind of rate. It's going to happen again. The idea that they can offset the $54 billion domestically without touching $1.8 trillion of Social Security and Medicare is ridiculous. And even if you look at domestic spending, there's $100 billion for airports and roads.
But do you think a boom or something akin to what you experienced with your old boss, Ronald Reagan, can happen if the president gets his way on tax cuts? In other words, could you start growing your way out of this enormous debt?
Not a chance, not a snowball's dance in the hot place. The reason for it, and this is what people need to focus on, there's already 1/3 more growth in the CBO baseline over the next 10 years than we've actually had in the last 10 years. So even if everything works perfectly and they could pass these huge tax cuts, which will never happen, we'll be lucky to get the amount of growth that CBO already has. And that means...
Well, here's where I think you could be wrong. I'm just reading numbers here, but you know the long-term math of this country better than anyone in this country. But I think they will get these tax cuts through. I think they will be sweeping, and I think they will add a lot of revenue. Now, where am I wrong on that? And why do you think that they can't agree on that? Because that seems to be the one thing in which they all agree.
No, they all agree.
Republicans.
The Republicans want to have revenue neutral or deficit neutral tax cuts.
Not all of them. Not
most
all
of them.
Some of them are happy to go into debt to get the bang for the buck later.
No, you can't get a reconciliation bill through the Senate unless it's revenue neutral after the 10-year
You know
period.
about dynamic accounting. You can make the numbers do anything you want. Like, did you know that this show is more popular than O'Reilly's? Did you know that?
Yeah.
My point is that they think they can do that. They can do that.
No, look, I mean, it's a long story, but what I'm saying is all the extra growth from dynamic accounting that you could get if you got all these tax cuts through, it will not happen. I mean, the math isn't there. It's impossible, but if you
So what happens? Then after that, we don't meet the debt thing. What happens? Just previewing this? Because I've already lost my appetite, but go ahead.
No, there is going to be a debt crisis this summer that will cause a financial crash of unbelievable proportions. It's going to go on for days and weeks, if not months, because Congress is already in such a nasty partisan...
But the market doesn't see it. I think stocks running up. The bond market is still telegraphing stable, but not out of control growth. So what are you seeing that they're not seeing?
I'm seeing reality. The robo-machines are simply trading sound bites and tweets and hourly sentiments. This is meaningless. This is the biggest suckers rally in history, and there's going to be a huge surprise very soon.
By the way, my cardiologist is thanking you, David, because up until you came along, I was actually looking forward to lunch and looking forward to dinner. Now I'm not. So thank you very, very much. David Stockman, the former budget director.